Hello and welcome to another edition of NIBA TV in isolation. There's three things I wanted to mention today, all fairly unrelated, but all I think pretty important at this particular time. Firstly, returning to the office, returning to work, returning to business. A lot of talk about that now with the easing of restrictions, with government wanting business to get underway to try and get the economy running again. A lot of concern about what has to be done for the health and safety of staff, and that's absolutely paramount. So I just wanted to mention again, we have put out information published by Safe Work Australia that is available, and there's information about that that we in our weekly compendium of updates. But Safe Work Australia has put out a massive amount of information about returning to work. Now, that's obviously office work for insurance brokers and their staff, but the information is also available for clients as well. So there's material there you can talk to your clients about and make sure that you're fully aware of all of the issues that have to be addressed when thinking about returning to work. The second one I wanted to talk about comes as a result of the fires across Southeast Australia into South Australia over the summer. And that is the issue of BAL ratings, BAL, Bushfire Attack Level Ratings. So pretty well any property in Australia that has any exposure to bushfire or fire generally will now have a BAL rating. And that BAL rating is critically important about in relation to what has to be the sum insured. And what happens there is that under the Australian building standards now, local councils will only allow the rebuilding of property in a manner which is consistent with the BAL rating of the property. So the BAL ratings can be relatively minor. If there's a low exposure to bushfire, there might only be minor work needing to be done to allow for that. If there's a significant exposure to fire, the BAL rating could be quite high, and that could have a very serious impact on the cost of rebuilding. And this has to be taken into account in thinking about the sum insured or the appropriate sum insured for the loss of the property. Whether it's fire or whether it's storm or other significant damage, no rebuilding will be allowed unless it's rebuilt in accordance with the BAL requirements. So this is important that clients understand their BAL rating for their property and have sufficient sum insured to make sure that if a significant loss happens to the property, that there will be sufficient insurance cover to fully cover the cost of rebuilding in accordance with the BAL rating. So please be aware of BAL ratings and take that into account when talking to clients about sums insured. The third area is one of the reform packages that the federal government is implementing, and this is the application of unfair contract terms legislation to insurance policies. Now, for the last few years, there has been federal legislation that says if there are particular clauses in a contract which are unfair, they can be challenged and removed from the contract. Now, that law up until recently does not apply to insurance contracts, but from early next year it will. And so there is now legislation in the process of implementation which will apply unfair contract terms legislation to insurance contracts. NIBA's been putting out information about this, but we're going to put a lot more information out over the next 3 or 4 months, and it's something that brokers are going to have to come to grips with and to learn about. It will be particularly important if your firm has its own wordings, particularly for domestic insurance for retail customers. If you are using your own broker wordings, you are going to have to review your policies to see whether any of those clauses, any provision in the contract, would be regarded as unfair. So this is going to be an important challenge for any broker firm that's using policies with their own broker wordings. where they're going to have to seriously think about, is any of the content or any of the provisions in the policy subject or likely to be subject to challenge under the unfair contract terms legislation. It's a fairly technical legal issue, and I do recommend you talk to your preferred legal provider to get an assessment as to whether any broker wordings would be particularly liable to challenge. So this is an important one, and we'll be talking about it a lot more over the next 6 months. The government has deferred a number of reform packages that was announced recently. This one is not being deferred. It will take effect in April 2021. So they're 3 items that are particularly important at this particular moment. I hope you are paying attention to those, as well as doing your very, very best to service your clients at this particular moment. I know it's very challenging. I wish you well. Please stay safe and please avoid the virus. Thanks very much.